Come on in. We're really glad to see you all tonight. Welcome to the Davis Futures Forum, a joint presentation presented by both the Davis Futures Forum and Yolo Mobility, which are working groups of Cool Davis. I'm Chris Granger, the Cool Davis Executive Director. I just wanted to start with some just basic logistics. Bathrooms are back there. If you get a catch in your throat, we did put out some water for everybody. We want to make sure that you recognize that there were little index cards or sticky notes on your seat. Those are for asking questions. So during the presentations, if you get a question in your head, write it down, and then someone's going to come by a little later and pick it up from you. You can put your hand in the air to get those questions. Sorry about that. So we're going to get started. Cool Davis, now probably since, I guess, maybe 2020, has been doing the land acknowledgement at the beginning of all of our major meetings. So we'll start with that, and then Judy Corbett, who's the lead for Davis Futures Forum, will have a few words. As we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Putwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Putwin tribes: the Cachel-Dehe Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, the Quetzal-Dehe Wintun Nation, and the Yocha-Dehe Wintun Nation. The Putwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. Judy?
Where would you like me?
You,
Wandering. Okay, I will wander. Well, thank you so much to all of you for being here. I just really appreciate your interest in what we feel like is a very... Thank you, all of you, for coming today. And we really appreciate the interest in what we think is an incredibly important problem ahead of us, the one that we're facing around transportation. I'm with the Davis Futures Forum, which we started right after I retired from the local government commission, bringing in people who had really great ideas and had implemented them in their communities. And I felt like Davis needed a little bit of that inspiration as well. The last thing we did before COVID was to bring in somebody who was working on form-based codes, and the city council picked that one up, and so we now have a form-based code about to be implemented downtown. But tonight we're talking about transportation and Highway 80, and I think there is no question that we have a problem there. The question is, how do we best resolve it? And the group of us that organize this are thinking there's more to consider than what Caltrans is considering, which is just getting more people on the freeway, that we need to step back and take a look at what is the impact of what we're doing and how can we really maybe do it better. And when I was working with the local government commission, we started working with a lot of public health officials and health agencies on land use and transportation, and they feel very strongly that you have to get physical activity in your life, and riding in a car all day is very bad for you. And so we went beyond walking and biking to actually transit, because they found that transit offers you more opportunity for climbing stairs and walking and staying healthy than certainly sitting for hours in a car. So another thing we were really concerned about among us is global warming. And we know that greenhouse gas emissions are the major contributor to global warming through the automobile. And how do we slow that one down? What are the alternatives for that? And then there's other issues too. We have a heat island effect. Every time you put in a big road, you end up with more heat coming up in village homes where we've managed to narrow the roads and put in trees. We're 10 degrees cooler than some of our neighbors, so that's another important consideration. So the question tonight, I guess, for us is, what do we do next? And we're in Davis, and the amazing thing about Davis is that there are these amazing people who live here, and some of the researchers that have been working on this for years and who are nationally and internationally known are actually here within walking distance. And so we decided to call upon them to come and give us some ideas of, okay, what do we do next? So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for coming, and all of you on the panel. And you want to take it back?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, well, thank you, Judy. As I mentioned before, please, if during any of the presentations you have questions that you want to remember for the Q&A, please write them down on the cards that you have at your seats. So with the climate emergency upon us, it's always a busy week for Cool Davis. This week we have 3 events, and I just want to call your attention to 2 of them coming up. One tomorrow, which is the Yolo County Climate Action and Adaptation Planning Workshop, which is a drop-in charrette being held at the Oddfellows between 4 and 7 during Art About tomorrow. So if you're downtown, please come on by. And next week, we're Zooming a special session with the Yolo Chief of the Office of Emergency Services to talk about how to protect your home and family during extreme weather events. So those are just some of the things coming up with Cool Davis. So tonight we have a very special person to Cool Davis, one of the first people at the university who got involved in supporting us right from our founding, Dan Sperling. Dan is agreed to be the MC for this evening. He is a professor of civil engineering and environmental science and policy, and the founding director of the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. He is recognized as a leading international expert on transportation technology assessment, energy, and environmental aspects of transportation and transportation policy. He's a recipient of the Blue Planet Prize from the Acai Glass Foundation, and author and co-author of more than 200 technical papers and 11 books. He's a former member of the California Air Resources Board and has served as chair of the Future of Mobility Council of the Davos World Economic Forum. So join me in welcoming Dan as our MC tonight.
Well, thank you, Chris. It is wonderful to be here and see so much enthusiasm and interest in something that Susan and I have spent our careers working on. So this is really an important discussion and debate. You know, it's important for the region, but it's also an indicator. It's kind of decisions being made everywhere about, are we going to build new roads, expand it? Because we have congestion, and no one likes to be stuck in traffic congestion. And so there's these trade-offs, and we're going to have a great presentation and discussion about all this. But you know, we have created in California. We started in LA. We created this very car-dependent, car-centric transportation system, spread to the rest of California, the rest of the world, and here we are. So Davis has done pretty well. You know, we have, you know, a very, you know, fantastic network of bikes. I'm an enthusiastic user of them. I don't, you know, I like to say I don't have a car, but my wife does. So I've adapted to Davis very well. So, you know, this is, as Chris was saying, climate, you know, this is a really big challenge, and transportation is a big part of it. In California, transportation accounts for almost half of all the greenhouse gases emitted in California. Almost half is from transportation. And most of that is from light-duty vehicles, but trucks and planes as well. And so here we are, what are we going to do about it? And the reality is that the state has really adopted, I 16 years on the Air Resources Board, we at CARB put a lot of effort into trying to reduce greenhouse gases from transportation, and we're quite successful with electric vehicles, kind of a technical fix, but failed almost totally on reducing vehicle use. And the reality is in California, about half, oh, that's you. I was hoping it wasn't me. And car use per capita in California is basically unchanged, for the last 10 years. And so, are we going to reduce car use? So reducing car use is great for the climate, great for, reducing pollution, but it's important for so many other reasons, in terms of community, land use, creating more space, safety. So there's a whole long list of reasons for reducing car dependence. So that's what we're here. Basically, that's kind of the heart of what we're talking about here with the I-80 expansion. Okay, so I'm just framing it. I'm going to be, the moderator here. So we have, to start off with, we have Autumn Bernstein, who is going to give us a little overview of this whole I-80 project. And Autumn is the executive director of the Yolo County Transportation District, not to be confused with Caltrans, by the way. Anyone? Okay, I was going to ask anyone from Caltrans here, but they probably. Okay, so, and the Yolo County Transportation District, it provides transit service, all the buses you see around here, multimodal transportation. So Autumn has done a great job of trying to build out the Yolo County Transportation District to be more multimodal. Something very important, she has 2 degrees from UC Davis, and most importantly, from our program in transportation at the Institute of Transportation Studies. That Susan Handy, by the way, heads up. And so, we got to know Autumn very well while she did her master's degree. Previously, she was executive director of Climate Plan, which is a statewide program dealing with climate policy and transportation. She was project manager for the committee to house the Bay Area. Okay, I don't actually know what that is, but someday we'll find out later. But I do have one story I know about Autumn that's never in her bio, that from years and years ago. And what's that? Mike, okay. And so this is a story that indicates how resourceful she is, how determined she is, and how she's so committed to sustainability. She biked around Asia, Thailand, and I think some other countries by herself on a bicycle with a trailer, had all kinds of challenges with the bike and the trailer. So here she is now. She made it, fortunately. It was all successful. And so, Autumn's going to tell us about the I-80 project. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dan. When you said you were going to tell a story about me, I got a little nervous. So I'm glad that's the story you told. All right, so my job tonight is to tell you a little bit about the I-80 project, and I'm just going to jump right in. So, Dan mentioned this already, but my name's Autumn Bernstein. I'm the executive director of the Yolo Transportation District. If you're not familiar with us, We do operate the Yolo bus service, the Causeway connection service, the B line. If you've seen that recently, that's our new on-demand service that I might say a little bit about if I have time. We do countywide transportation planning and funding coordination. We have an annual budget of $25 million. And we collaborate with local, regional, state, and federal partners on trying to solve the transportation and mobility needs of our county. So I want to just pause because I've been in this role for 2 years, and one of the things we did fairly recently was update our vision, values, and priorities statement. And so I won't go through all of this, but our vision is to provide seamless, sustainable mobility solutions to help Yolo communities thrive. And our 3 priorities are about providing transit service that's fast, reliable, and convenient, partnering with our member jurisdictions and other agencies to identify and address the current and evolving mobility needs of Yolo County, and coordinate, plan, and fundraise to actually deliver projects. And I think it's the last category that this project we're talking about tonight fits into. So I want to start with a little bit of context. Maybe I can look down so I'm not, here we go. I'm sorry for, I don't want to be looking at you, but also I need to work from my slides. So I wanted to show you this image, which is actually from 2016. So I think if we did it today, it would look pretty different. But what this shows you is commuting in Northern California. And each little individual red line is a trip. And the areas where you see it kind of glowing orange and white is where there's concentrations of trips. And if you look at between the Sacramento and Vallejo, you see all these little lines, right? That's the Yolo Causeway. It's the only east-west crossing of the Yolo bypass. It's also the only stretch of I-80 less than 4 lanes between San Francisco and Roseville. The majority of trips on the Causeway are interregional. They're not local. The travel in this area is fueled by economic and demographic trends in the Bay Area and Sacramento regions. Obviously, the high cost of housing being a big one, and the hybrid remote work schedule phenomenon that we've seen since COVID. I don't think anybody here is unfamiliar with how that has shifted things in Northern California. We have many people that have left the Bay Area, have moved up to the Sacramento region, and are commuting to the Bay Area 2 to 3 times per week. And so some of what we've seen is in this shifting travel that we're seeing on the Yolo Causeway. It used to be most of the trips in the morning are going eastbound to Sacramento. Now it's the opposite, right? People are going westbound and they're going long distances. And these underlying forces are a huge driver of what we see happening on the Causeway. These trends are expected to continue with a 20% increase in vehicle travel on the Causeway by 2049. So what does this mean in terms of the existing and future conditions on the Causeway? Well, right now, if there's no traffic, it takes about 12 minutes to get from Davis to West Sacramento. When it's congested, the average is 22 minutes. And what that means for our transit passengers is they experience delay and unreliable travel times. The number one complaint we have when we hear from our passengers is, I just don't know if it's going to take me half an hour or 45 minutes or an hour to get to Sacramento because our buses sit in the traffic. They don't get to bypass the traffic, right? In the future, there are corridor widenings that are currently under construction to the east and the west of us. In Solano County, they're adding an additional lane. It's going to go to, in some places 5, some places 6 lanes. And then the lanes that are under construction on 50 in Sac County are also adding capacity on either side to us. So what that does is it exacerbates the bottleneck effect where we are here in Yolo County. The Caltrans estimates for 2049 is that the travel time will be 3 to 4 times longer than it is today. So that's the kind of the Friday afternoon phenomenon, right, where it takes an hour to get across. It's basically that happening more often for more hours of the day and for more days of the week. So that's a little bit of the context around the corridor itself. In terms of the project, it is a partnership between Caltrans and Yolo Transportation District. The goal of the project is to add 1 new managed lane each way from the county line to the county line, with no widening of the existing causeway structure. So trying to maintain the existing footprint of the freeway while figuring out how to move more people across it. The EIR has got a mess of alternatives. There's 14 total. The A, B for each of these is whether or not there would be what's called a direct connector in West Sacramento at 80/50. And this is essentially a way for people who are in the fast lane to stay in the fast lane rather than having to merge all the way over. And then to get if you want to stay on 80 eastbound, for example, going to Reno. And that just has some congestion benefits if you do it that way. So that's the difference between A and B. Other than that, there's really kind of 5 categories of alternative. The first is a carpool lane. The second category is what's called a high occupancy toll lane, which is where carpools and buses go for free, and then solo drivers can pay a toll to use that lane. The next category is express lane, which is basically where all users would pay, even carpools. Normally, in that kind of a situation, carpools get a discount, and carpools above a certain point might also ride free. So it's kind of a subtle distinction between high occupancy toll lane and express lane, but that's really what that means. Bus only lane. I think everybody knows what that means, and then convert an existing lane to a carpool lane. So these are the alternatives that Caltrans evaluated in the EIR. And I just want to say, it's Caltrans EIR. I will try my best to answer questions about it, but it is we were not the ones who put it together, so I don't claim to be the expert. So a little bit of the background on this project. In June of 2021, my agency, Yolo TD, we won an $86 million federal grant to build managed lanes. And it's important to note that this funding can only be used for managed lanes as they were defined in the 2021 grant application. So really carpool or toll lanes. It's not money that is flexible and can be used for other things. If we don't build a project that is adding a lane to the causeway, we give that money back, and then the federal government puts it back in their pool and gives it to some other highway project somewhere else. August of that year, Caltrans began the environmental review process. And then later that year, my board appointed an ad hoc committee to establish goals, study best practices, and engage with Caltrans around what this project ought to be and what the best practices would be in terms of the kind of lane that would best meet the goals that we have, that our board has, representing Yolo County communities. And just to say, so my board, just so you know, it's one representative from each of the cities in Yolo County and one representative from the county supervisors. So in May of 2022, after 6 or 8 months of study and discussion, the Yolo TD board identified express lanes as our preferred alternative for the project. In other words, lanes that are free for carpools above a certain number, free for buses, and then where solo drivers would pay a fee. So what do we mean by toll lanes or express lanes? Sometimes these terms can be used interchangeably, but again, a toll lane is a freeway lane that's free for carpools and buses. Solo drivers pay a fee. And in our case, the toll revenue would be reinvested in transit, equity, and VMT reduction programs here in Yolo County. And that's a commitment that we received from Caltrans early on in the negotiations around this project. And it's reflected in the EIR in terms of the types of investments. It's investments to increase frequency of capital corridor service, to make capital corridor service in Yolo Bus more affordable, additional causeway connection trips, a whole host of VMT mitigation strategies that are in there that would be funded initially through the core project capital, but then would be funded on an ongoing basis using the toll revenue that we generate. So why toll lanes? Why am I here suggesting that I think toll lanes are a good idea? Well, a couple things. First of all, pricing highways is essential to meeting the state and regional climate and VMT goals. We would be the first priced freeway project in the Sacramento region. So it's a strategy that's already in place in other parts of the state, but not yet here. And here's a quote from the CARB scoping plan, which is, of course, their plan for meeting GHG goals, which is that California will not meet its climate goals without implementing equitable roadway pricing strategies. And these are projected to achieve up 27 to 37% of the needed per capita VMT reduction. So in this way, tolling really is superior to general purpose lanes or carpool lanes, particularly when you take that revenue and reinvest it into transit alternatives. The second key point here is that it is a proven strategy for increasing carpooling and transit ridership on freeways. There's a lot of data from the projects that are out there. And there's really 2 reasons this happened. One, again, the buses are not stuck in traffic like they are today. So you have faster, more reliable trips for buses and carpools, which creates a huge incentive. And it creates that revenue stream that you can invest in increasing the frequency of transit. And it also actually offers better congestion management than either general purpose or carpool lanes. And I know this is not like a congestion crowd, so I won't go into detail on that, but if you're interested, I'm happy to answer questions about why it is that putting a price on the road actually means that you get better vehicle throughput, but it is true. So I'm going to wrap up here. I just wanted to note a couple other things. You might have seen these brightly colored vehicles around. This is our new Beeline service. It's on-demand transit. It's available anywhere in the city of Woodland, and it's also available if people who are going to or from the city of Winters or the Town of Knights Landing. So this is a new kind of transit where you use your phone to book a ride just like Uber, but then you share the ride because the app finds other people that are going the same place you are. So check it out the next time you're in Woodland or the next time you want to go out to Winters. We hope you'll try it out. And then one other planning project I just want to highlight is our Yolo Active Transportation Corridors project. This is just kicking off. This effort will establish a vision and plan for countywide active transportation corridors to connect Yolo County cities and rural communities. It's got a particular focus on addressing mobility barriers for those low-income residents, particularly those who live in rural areas and don't have good access to transportation. And this was also funded by a federal planning grant. And Brian Abinat, who's here with me, our Director of Planning, is overseeing that project, and he'd be happy to answer any questions you have on that. So with that, I think I've used all my time, so I will stop. Thank you.
Okay, so now we have our featured speaker here today, distinguished Professor Susan Handy. She has been at UC Davis here for quite a while, not as long as me. Doesn't have the gray hair as much as me, but she's had an incredible career. She is known as one of the top researchers in the world at looking at the relationships between transportation and land use, travel behavior, strategies for reducing car dependence, and done a lot of work as well on bicycles. So whenever we have people come to Davis, we always have Susan give a bike tour for them around the city. She, among other things, she's director of the National Center for Sustainable Transportation in the U.S. So there's one center funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation on sustainable transportation. And so Susan's headed that up. It's been since 2013 and has recompeted for it and won it 3 different times and leads a consortium that includes USC, Georgia Tech, University of Vermont, and UC Riverside, and Cal State LA. And there's another college just added from Texas this past time. So Susan really, and she's done a lot of work with Caltrans, with the Air Resources Board, on all of these kinds of strategies on car use and car dependence and land use. So she is like the best person we could have to talk about this. So yay, Susan. And I should add, she's my close colleague at ITS, so very happy to have you here, Susan.
Thank you, Dan. I think you used half my time with that introduction. Okay, so I'm going to talk in very general terms about some of the sort of the concepts and the research around this issue, rather than talking specifically about the I-80 project, although I might sneak in a few opinions about that. Okay, so the story tonight starts with what I think of as the congestion obsession. And the story is going to end there as well. I'm going to come back to this. This obsession has been with us for a long time, so at least a century, more than a century. We've been worrying about congestion in urban areas. We've been trying to fight congestion for more than a century, and you can see how successful we've been. This obsession with congestion is very much embedded in how we do transportation planning. So we measure congestion with this concept called level of service. And it goes from A, not many cars on the freeway, down to F when you get stop and go traffic. This is, what's that? Closer to the mic. Okay, thank you. This is all built into this highway capacity manual, tells us how to do all of these calculations. Okay, in simple terms, level of service is a function of volume, the volume of traffic, to capacity. Okay, so when we think about how do we solve congestion, we can look at this relationship and think about what do we do? Okay, if we want congestion to go down, what can we do? Well, we can make capacity go up. We can increase the denominator, and that'll bring down level of service, i.e. congestion. And that's what we've been doing for more than a century. So you look at the purpose and need for I-80 as articulated on the website and in the draft EIR, and it says, I know that's very small writing, but I wanted to put it all up there. At the top, it says purpose. The purpose of the proposed project is to ease congestion and improve overall person throughput. The need. The proposed project is needed for the following reasons. Recurring congestion during the AM and PM peak periods exceeds current design capacity, limiting person throughput. Okay, that last statement actually doesn't really make sense, but you get the idea that that this is about congestion reduction, right? That's the primary rationale for the project. Okay, well, let's talk about what happens when we add capacity. So there's the short run and the long run. In the short run, you add new capacity, you get faster speeds on the freeway. That means shorter travel times. Shorter travel times are going to change the choices that people make. Okay, the traffic that's out there, there's not a stable amount of traffic. Things are going to change. So travel times get shorter. People are going to make longer trips. They're going to choose a more distant destination sometimes. They're going to take more trips. There may be a trip they chose not to make because of congestion, and now they say, oh yeah, I will go to Sacramento for dinner on Friday night. And they may shift from other modes back to car. So of course, all of that means more driving, and when we get more driving, then that's going to slow down the speeds, and what happens? Then we get pressure for yet another highway widening. So we get this ongoing self-reinforcing cycle of adding capacity, generating more driving, leading to demand for more capacity. Okay, and then if you remember your Econ 101, we can also explain this with supply and demand curves. So we've got a downward sloping demand curve. So when the cost of driving, i.e. travel time, is high, there's very little volume. When the cost of driving goes down, when you can move fast, then there's going to be more volume, right? More people are going to demand more driving. And then we've got the supply curve going the other way, where if the volume is high, then the cost of driving is high. Okay. So what happens when we add capacity, it's effectively a shift in the supply curve. So that at any, let's see if I can say this right, at any given volume, the cost of driving is going to be less. Any given volume of traffic out there on the road, the cost of driving is going to be less. And so this is what we call induced travel. It's that increase in the volume of driving that we get when the supply curve shifts because of a capacity widening. Okay, so that's the short run. And then we may get even more adjustments in the long run. So new capacity, meaning faster speeds, meaning better access to the land that is served by those facilities in that new capacity. And access influences the development potential of land. So land with better access has more development potential. So you change the patterns of access to land, and you're going to get shifts in development patterns. And of course, all that freeway building, what has that done over the last century? As Dan alluded to, that freeway building has contributed to more sprawling development patterns. Decentralization, lower density development, which of course contributes to more driving. And then we may also see, although here the evidence is a little less certain, you can also get potentially an increase in population in the region through these investments, which of course then leads to more driving. And again, more driving, slower speeds, and we get this continued pressure for continued capacity expansion. And again, in Econ 101 terms, we've already shifted the supply curve. Over the long run, we may see an additional shift in the demand curve this time, which then leads to an additional increase in the volume of traffic out there on the freeway. So this has all been studied very rigorously, and we at UC Davis have not done this research ourselves, but we have spent a lot of time seeking out that research and understanding it and synthesizing it. And this is a summary of that research we did almost a decade ago. We've been updating it since then, and it's all available on our website. But what the research very consistently shows is an elasticity of about 1. And what that means is that a 1% increase in the capacity of the freeway leads in a period of maybe 5, 6, 7 years to a 1% increase in what we call vehicle miles of travel. That's how we measure the amount of driving. So 1% increase in capacity, a 1% increase in vehicle miles of travel. So what does that mean for congestion? Well, capacity goes up. Volume does not stay fixed. It's going up by an equal percentage to the increase in capacity. So we've got both of those things going up. And what does that mean for congestion? We get essentially no change in congestion. The freeway is now carrying more cars and more vehicle miles of travel, which may be the objective, but it's not fixing the congestion problem. All right, so we at UC Davis took this elasticity out of the research, and we created this thing called the Induced Travel Calculator, which is causing quite a stir in the state among those who are proposing highway widenings. And what this calculator lets you do is plug in a certain amount of miles of additional lanes for a freeway in a county in California, and you can use the calculator to estimate what would be the increase in vehicle miles of travel as a result of that highway widening. This is an important exercise because this has to be done for as a part of the environmental review process for proposed highway widening projects. Okay, so Caltrans has now blessed this calculator as one of the accepted methods for estimating the increase in vehicle miles of travel for proposed highway widening projects. All right, so this now competes with the traditional way of estimating the increase in vehicle miles of travel for highway projects that's been used for 5 or 6 decades now. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that approach, but first just wanted to share some comparisons here. So one thing we did after we created this calculator was to pick a sample of environmental impact reports for various highway projects in California and look at what estimates they had in those reports for this increase in vehicle miles of travel. And maybe I should just be explicit here that vehicle miles of travel really matters because that's what determines greenhouse gas emissions as well as lots of other kinds of environmental impacts. So these estimates of VMT increases because of the widening are really important to the environmental review process. So we compared what we found in these environmental impact reports to what our calculator would estimate for that increase. So our estimates are in the middle column, and what was in the EIR is in that last column. And you can see that our estimates out of the calculator are quite a bit higher than what was in the environmental impact report. And a couple of our couple of our sample EIRs did not even address the question of induced travel. Okay, so how we've been doing this, well, we don't know what the actual reality is, but this sort of comparison suggests that the traditional approach to doing this kind of estimation is giving us an underestimate of what the impacts would be. And we know why that is. These travel demand forecasting models are not perfect, and there are a lot of feedbacks that the model should have that they don't have that would help them do a better job of estimating this induced travel effect. So this gets really nerdy and technical, and we can get into it in questions, but just to note that these models are not good at giving us an accurate estimate of that induced VMT, which means that they are overestimating the benefits in terms of congestion reduction, and they are underestimating the environmental impacts of that project. And I should note that the reverse is also true. So if we talk about the no-build option, what if we don't build anything and we just let congestion get worse? These models are not very good at picking up the kinds of adjustments that people would make in the face of worsening congestion. So there's good reason to question those forecasts about how bad conditions would be in 2049 for a variety of reasons, but in part because these models do not take into account all of these adjustments that people make to their behavior in response to changing conditions on the highway, if that makes sense. Okay, so then if we want congestion to go down, what's our other option? Rather than adding capacity, we can think about managing demand, meaning managing that volume. And that's where pricing is really important. And we pretty well know from the academic literature that if we want to reduce congestion, that's how we're going to do it, is through pricing. Pricing has not been a politically viable thing in this country, but that is changing. Manhattan is going to have congestion pricing as of this spring. Even more exciting to me is the fact that last month, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the Bay Area held these events where they discussed the possibility of tolling freeway lanes, meaning not just the one managed lane where people can buy their way in, but putting a toll across the whole freeway, focusing on areas where there's a lot of congestion, but also good alternatives to the freeway, like where we have Caltrans or where we have BART. So this is a really important, as I think of it, shift in thinking about how we can approach these issues. Okay, so somebody asked me to talk about what works. It's really important to note that the answer to that question depends on what the goal is. Okay, so if we're talking about solutions, we want to make sure we're clear about what the goal is, how we're defining the problem. So if the goal is reducing congestion, it is clear that pricing is going to be the way to do it. If the goal is to provide alternatives to driving, we know there are a lot of things we can do, like working on our mix of land uses, thinking about network connectivity, especially for bicycles and pedestrians, investing in transit, investing in good bicycle infrastructure. All of that can help to provide alternatives to driving. And Davis sort of proves that point. But if we want to reduce VMT, if that's the goal, and actually the state, as Dan alluded to, has said that is the goal. We have official policy that says we need to be reducing vehicle miles of travel because that's essential to meeting our goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Then we need to reduce VMT. And to do that, we have to do all of the above. So we're going to have to make sure there are all good alternatives for people, make it possible for people to drive less, but then we've also got to do the pricing thing and discourage people from driving. It's really going to take that whole set of strategies. Okay, I should just make a note about managed lanes here, because that is what's being proposed for I-80. There is not much research about managed lanes specifically in comparison to general purpose lanes, the normal freeway lane. What evidence there is suggests that the induced travel effect may be just as significant for managed lanes as it is for general purpose lanes. And there's good sort of logical reasons to believe that that could be true. I totally agree that managed lanes are better than general purpose lanes, and that's mostly about the benefits to transit. But we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that the managed lanes are going to mean no induced travel or even improvement in congestion on the rest of the lanes. Okay, so I want to take just the last couple of minutes. I think I still have, make a little plug for my new book, if you're interested in all this stuff. But the point I want to make is that, I think there's a bigger challenge here, that if we're ever going to get past this highway-oriented approach to transportation, we need to not just change what we're doing, but what we need is a fundamental shift in the way of thinking that underlies that highway-oriented approach. And if we can shift our thinking, then we start to see the problems in different ways, and that leads us to different kinds of solutions. So in the book, I talk about 9 core ideas that make up the dominant way of thinking in the transportation profession, that have dominated the transportation profession for the last 100 years, and that are very much embedded in transportation practice. And what these ideas add up to is a focus on making it easier to drive. That's what we've been trying to do for the last century. What's interesting is that there are alternative ideas out there, none of which are new. There have been people in the profession promoting these alternative ideas almost as long as the traditional ideas have been around. But what's interesting at this moment in time is the increasing acceptance of these alternative ideas within the profession. So it's a very interesting and exciting time, and leads me to have some hope that we might be at the point of what we might call a paradigm shift in the transportation field, where we move from the old way, making it easier to drive, to the new way, which is about making it easier to not drive, which is kind of a nice thing. But what makes me feel a little less optimistic is that I see a lot of this going on. I think of this as the throw everything at it mentality, where the it is congestion. So we are simultaneously widening our highways and investing in alternatives to driving, which may seem great on the surface, but it's not going to solve congestion, and it really is not, not really doing right by those alternatives. If we make all these investments in transit, we're sort of wasting that money if we're also continuing to make it easier to drive. Okay, so my last point, I think where we make real progress is when we get over this obsession with congestion, which, none of us like congestion, but maybe that's not where our focus needs to be. Instead, if we focus on providing alternatives, which is an approach that's sometimes called accessibility planning for accessibility, that's where the green check mark goes. Let's focus on providing alternatives. And if we do that, then that makes congestion irrelevant. And to me, that's the solution to congestion, is make it irrelevant to our lives. Okay, so that's that. Thank you, and looking forward to your questions.
Okay, so actually, it reminds me I made one big mistake. I did not plug Susan's book because it just came out a month or two ago, and it's really well written. It's, very accessible. I think there's the supply and demand curve is in there, as I recall, but it's very easy to understand. It's very well written. So
No supply and demand.
there's not even a
That's
supply.
only for my students.
Okay, so now we have a panel, and if the panelists can come up here, they're going to get how much time? 5 minutes each. Okay, so Autumn, you already met Autumn. And then we have Naila Pope-Hardin, and she's Executive Director of Climate Plan. And if you were listening carefully, you would have heard that that's what Autumn headed up in a previous job. And she's also a member of the California Transportation Commission's Interagency Equity Advisory Committee. So then we have Steve Wheeler, who's a professor at UC Davis in the Department of Human Ecology that Susan and I have worked with for many years. And he's the author of books also, including Planning for Sustainability, Reimagining Sustainable Cities. And he was the 2022 UC Davis Faculty Sustainability Champion. And then Don Mooney. I'm back here. Okay. Okay, he's going is environmental attorney practicing law here in Davis, and he's conducted litigation in state and federal courts in a large number of environmental areas, water rights, CEQA, NEPA, and so on. So they're going to each speak for a few minutes, but you notice there's cards on your chair. So write those cards up, they'll be collected, and we're going to use those to pose questions and have a lively discussion. I'm pretty sure, okay, some people might need pens. Okay, be generous and share them with each other. Part of the sharing economy here. Okay, so I guess, Autumn, you already did your talking, right? Okay, Steve.
Well, do you want to do this?
Sure.
That's right, yours.
All right. So, again, my name is Naila Pope-Hardin. I am the Executive Director of Climate Plan. We are a statewide coalition of about 60 organizations across the state that focus on all things transportation, land use, air quality, and we track basically 375 at a regional level, but also advocate at a statewide level for policies. Thanks to Autumn for setting a great foundation for us. So my background, though, is more so in community organizing. I've been a community organizer for 15 years with a specialty in transportation equity. I just believe that if we can get people where they need to go, that's my goal. Can we get people in the door? And then all the other folks working on different social justice issues can take it from there. While we talk about pricing and we talk about this, I want to talk about just the foundation of justice and equity. And there are three ways that you can think, or three components to equity and justice. There's process, right? Was the process to get here done equitably? Did everyone have a say? Was everybody given the same access to give input? How was that input weighed? Were the people that are most impacted, was their input weighed more or less? And there's a lot that goes into calculating if the process is equitable. We know for this project in many ways the process was not equitable. Then there's outcomes. Is it an equitable or just outcome? Sometimes we don't have to have an equitable process to have the end product be just, right? We will hope that we have both, but we can still have justice and an equitable outcome even if the process is faulty. And we know, given some of the issues with this project, that the outcome is also not equitable or so just. The last way we think about justice, and in these crowds, sometimes it can be really hard because I know we love to be qualitative folks, quantitative numbers, see. But I'm gonna talk about the qualitative version of it, which is, does it have a sense of justice? That's like, does it feel right? Especially for communities that have been burdened continuously. even if the process is fair, even if the outcome is fair, that doesn't always mean it feels right. A great example of that is our economy right now. The numbers say that we have, that, we're making a recovery. Most people on the ground, it doesn't feel right. So it's not enough to just have a good process. It's not enough to have a good outcome. We also have to really factor in, how does it feel? In these pricing conversations, often we talk about it as if it's an option. It is an inevitability. This is what was going to be happening in order for us to reach our VMT goals and our GHG reduction goals. Pricing, given the tools that we have access to now, is inevitable at some point. It's not politically nice. There's a lot of things we need to work out. But I want everybody to kind of wrap their mind around, this is where we're going. And so in some of these conversations, when we talk about managed lanes versus tolling lanes and what's best, it is in some ways temporary. And for folks when we're talking about planning for our future, for our younger folks, they're going to be correcting many of the things that we do now. Okay. To that point, if we look at some of the studies about driver's licenses, we can see that young folks are not getting driver's license. About 20 to 30% less driver's licenses are being pursued between 16 and 24-year-olds right now. We don't have a lot around what that looks like after 24 or what that looks like long term, but young folks are not driving. So when we're talking about building these roads also, we need to talk about for what future. I think folks in younger generations are more comfortable with ride sharing, all these mode shifts, these alternatives, transit, also in these Zoom towns and Zoom worlds where they're used to being virtual. I have 2 nephews who are 17 who have no desire to drive. My family, we can't understand this because, we're thinking cars and freedom. But they have no desire to drive and they think we're crazy. Why would I have an extra bill? For a car note? What about car insurance? It's dangerous. I can get in an Uber. I can, while out and do all kind of crazy things and not have to worry about DUIs or getting in trouble. There is a culture shift that is also happening that I think a lot of these conversations aren't really keeping up pace with. So sorry, y'all. My notes are a little sloppy, as you can see. I'm not a hot mess. I'm just a very lukewarm mess. So one of the things, we track pricing at Climate Plan on a statewide lens, and just last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, down in San Diego, their MPO board SANDAG voted to take pricing, the road user charge, completely out of their regional transportation plans. Again, we act like pricing is an option. It is an inevitability. And so we need to really start to grapple with that. While it's not politically exciting or something that a lot of politicians or even some of our agencies want to take on, it is something that we need to be talking about a lot more. Okay, so now just some of the specifics to the project that I want to point out. When we talk about pricing and equity, don't think about it as equality, right? I think a lot of times there's this paternalistic idea that we don't want to price low-income communities, that's not fair, right? Which there is a lot of that. We need to make sure that when we're pricing communities, we are making sure that it's done equitably. But if we're pricing in a way that provides alternatives to communities, then we need to be pursuing that, and we need to be pursuing that vigorously. See, I'm just trying to go. Okay, 2 last points, and I'm so sorry this is so scattered, you guys. 2 last points just about what's going on. So the coalition I work with, we sent in a letter, which I'm hopeful some of your organizations saw. We were able to get 60 organizations in California to sign on a letter that demands a moratorium on highway widening until there is some type of audit or investigation into what funding pots are used specifically for this project, but more funding pots in general. How are we using these? We were also able to get 45 out-of-state and national organizations to sign on as well. So over 100 organizations have requested a moratorium on highway widening. We had a discussion with the governor's office earlier today, actually, and okay, I didn't think of a politically correct way to say this. They're taking it into consideration. And so we do need champions that are going to be able to speak really loudly about this and really effectively about, what, not just this project, but what the implications of this project are for the whole state. I think across the board, everyone is looking at what's happening here with these managed lanes and as what will happen with the state. And so I'm also going to encourage, as folks are thinking about advocacy and what you're requesting, just keep that in mind. We can make deals that are great for Sacramento. We can get a lot of mitigation, some really good, substantial potential extra funding for projects in Sacramento, but the whole state is looking. And we really need to use this opportunity to really shift the paradigm. And it's an opportunity to really call some of our leaders that are climate champions, especially our governor, and really push them to say, what is the litmus test? If you care about climate, how are you reducing VMT? And then last little thing I'll just throw out is, I'm not gonna throw it out. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have 3 slides. I'm going to try to stick to 5 minutes and 3 slides. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, 32 years ago. That's still Susan's slide. Yes, I know. Here we go. Well, it'll come up. 32 years ago, I led a lawsuit in the Bay Area against widening Interstate 80. On behalf of a coalition of environmental groups, which included the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, and the group I was working for at the time, Urban Ecology. And we actually got a restraining order. At that time, I-80 was 3 lanes going through the inner bay. And Caltrans argued they have this new innovation, this new green technique, the HOV lane. And we argued that you haven't studied alternatives. You haven't looked at transit in the corridor. You haven't looked at the corridor as a whole. You haven't looked at coordinating land use with transportation and so forth. And when you sue Caltrans, you're basically suing an 800-pound gorilla. So we lost in the end, but we did slow it down a whole lot. 32 years later, we're in the same place. Caltrans hasn't learned a thing, and we have the same situation in the Bay Area, where now it is 5 to 6 lanes going through the East Bay, and I don't think they can expand it anymore because they're running into the bay or Aquatic Park. So sooner or later, it has to stop. Okay, yes, why don't you just do all the points there? There are a lot of problems with this project, and I am not going to go through them all. It does increase CO2 emissions by Caltrans' own modeling, which understates the problem by 11% in 2029. Traffic grows by as much as 37% long-term. Again, this is Caltrans modeling, which is not very good. And we basically are undercutting the state of California's climate planning. At the upper right is where emissions come from in California, and the biggest chunk is transportation, as Dan said earlier. And this is the one chunk that California is doing worst on. We are actually making progress in some other ways, but transportation is the toughest nut. Caltrans is basically at this point operating as a rogue agency in defiance of state and local policy. We have state policy, which has been referred to. We also have the Yolo County Climate Action Plan, the Sacramento Climate Action Plan, and other local documents which have strong language against increasing VMT, vehicle miles traveled. Caltrans is just ignoring all this and is out on its own. Caltrans is basically a herd of beavers. They know how to do one thing, build roads, and it is time for the state to rein them in. Let's have the next slide. We have this environmental impact report. It is not a very good one. It has a lot of problems. I'm not going to go through them all, but I do encourage many of you to send comments in. And Dawn, in a little bit, will talk about how to send useful and good comments in. They can be mailed to Yolo80 at yctd.org. Starting point is studying alternatives. That is at the heart of CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. Caltrans hasn't done this because it knew from the start it wanted to widen the road. Yes, Autumn showed a whole lot of alternatives. Almost all of them include widening the road. There are also problems with modeling and other things I am not going to go into. Caltrans assumes that it can buy its way out of the increase in traffic by paying local governments for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, this only offsets 43% of the rise in VMT, and many of those projects would happen anyway. It's not a good excuse. So what do we do? Let's have the third slide about congestion what do we do about congestion if we do in fact want to address congestion? And yes, it is a concern for most of us. As Susan mentioned, the best alternative is pricing. A Bay Bridge-style toll plaza placed eastbound before the elevated causeway, metering all lanes with charging all lanes a toll, and putting a bus bypass lane in so that Autumn gets her lovely transit lane going all the way down to Sacramento. Instead of costing up to $465 million, if you toll all lanes at, say, a $10 toll, you make almost $500 million a year. You can then put that into a fund to support transit and affordable housing in the corridor. And that helps reduce congestion too. That alternative, of course, was never studied. And the alternative of doing a look at the entire corridor was never studied. Even though Caltrans did start doing a plan to do that several years ago, they have never completed it and probably are not interested in doing so. Greatly improving public transit has not been studied. Yes, there are some small improvements that would be funded, but much better express bus service, much better and free and cheaper Capital Corridor rail service, feeder bus service within local communities, a whole package should be on the table. And lastly, the do-nothing alternative is not a bad choice. It is misleading for project backers to call the Yolo bypass the only bottleneck on I-80. I-80 is full of bottlenecks. And congestion is to some extent self-limiting. So these projections of massive increases by 2040, 2050, if nothing is done, are bogus. So let's have this be the pivotal moment that helps California rethink its freeway addiction. State and local leaders need to step up and broker a better solution. YCTD board members Lucas Frericks, Josh Chapman, Tom Stullard, Dante Early, Jesse Lauren, and Matt Dulcich need to take a lead. And they will be meeting next Monday to consider this, along with Assemblymember Cecilia Aguilar Curry and Senator Bill Dodd and the governor's office. And I agree, we need to hold the governor's feet to the fire on this too. So there are good alternatives. We don't need to waste, what was it, $86 million on a bad project. It's better to send the money back and have a good project. Thank you. Don will talk about how to send in good comments on the EIR.
Am I next? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hi. So I'm Don Mooney. As they said, I'm an attorney. I've been doing CEQA litigation for about 30 years, which is kind of scary. I think I've done it that long. A couple of things about the way Caltrans approves projects. Is a lot of you have probably been involved in projects, challenging projects for the city and the county and things like that, where the draft EIR comes out, the final EIR comes out, then they hold a public hearing, and you get to submit more comments on the final EIR and have a public hearing on that. That doesn't happen with Caltrans. Your opportunity to comment on the Caltrans project essentially expires on January 5th. You have to have those comments in because Caltrans does not hold public hearings. The approval of they will prepare a final EIR. They only have to provide the response to comments in the final EIR to the resource agencies technically. There is no further formal review period on the final EIR. They will then approve the final EIR. It's more of an administrative thing where they just certify the EIR, sign some papers and certify the EIR. It's not done in a public format or anything of that nature. So lots of times people think they can wait till the final EIR comes out. That doesn't work with the state agencies and with Caltrans. So if you're going to get comments in, they need to be in by January 5th unless Caltrans agrees to extend the time. When you're doing comments, just saying that this is a bad idea or a bad project is not a substantive comment. It's good that Caltrans can hear that the public may not like it, but if you want to have substantive comments, when you're commenting on an EIR, you're looking at whether or not substantial evidence, and there's a definition of substantial evidence, but basically it's expert reports and things of that nature, whether or not that their conclusions and such are supported by substantial evidence. If you just simply say we disagree with your outcome, with your decision, or we disagree with your conclusions, that doesn't really rise to the level of what would be a substantive comment. So the types of things that you're looking for in addressing comments, well, there are alternatives, whether there are other alternatives that are viable or feasible alternatives that they haven't explored, whether or not they have misstated the facts or omitted facts, looking to that their conclusions are not supported by facts, those types of things. One of the nice things about being in a community like Davis and this area is that we have lots of people with very technical expertise and backgrounds. If you're submitting comments and you have technical expertise with regards to those comments, whether you're an engineer, a wildlife biologist, things like that, make sure you state that in your comments. Even attach your CV if it's relevant. Because if you do not do that and you are making comments on very technical matters and there is nothing in the record to indicate that you have that level of expertise, that ends up being lay testimony. And lay testimony, especially if this goes to if it gets litigated, the courts don't consider lay testimony on very technical matters to be considered substantial evidence. So if you have that level of expertise, make sure your opening paragraph, you're an engineer, you have this background. I had a conversation with somebody the other day. They did these great comments, nothing in there about their expertise, and they were doing noise calculations. Well, your average person doesn't just sit out and do noise calculations. And I called the guy and said, hey, you got to submit your resume. You got to, I don't know if you have the expertise. And he says, I do. And I said, well, nobody's going to know that. And the reason that's important is if it goes to litigation, and this is what I do, is I litigate, so I always think about how it's going to get to the court. When there's litigation, the court can only look at the administrative record that has been presented, and that is the comments that are being presented to the agency. In terms of evidence, if it goes to litigation, in terms of evidence that the court can consider, the world stops in terms of evidence the day they approve it. And so you can't, even if something dramatic happens, a new species, an endangered species is discovered living in the causeway that's going to be impacted by the project, and that gets discovered after they've approved the project. You cannot introduce that evidence into court. The court cannot consider that. So that's why all this information has to get to the agency ahead of time. You can't cherry pick. You can't sit back and say, well, I'm going to do this at the last minute, or I'll wait till after they're done, and then I'm going to tell them about this. That won't fly. If you don't have expertise, still comment. But and particularly if there's things like you have personal observations. You've observed the traffic. You've been in the Bay Area. You've observed when there's been an increase in capacity, you get an increase in demand over time. Make those comments, but make sure you also say that it's based upon your personal knowledge and why you have that personal knowledge. You've been a resident of Davis for 30 years or 40 years. You've commuted to the Bay Area. You've commuted to Sacramento for work for 15, 20 years. You've seen the increase in capacity, and then you see the increase in congestion. So you can make those personal observations, and that will be considered to be substantial evidence. Now, in the final EIR, Caltrans has to provide a written response to all of those timely comments that were made that were substantive comments. They don't have to comment. They don't have to respond to comments to, the petitions that are signed by 150 people saying this is a bad idea. They'll just say, thank you, comment noted, and they move on. So, but anyway, those are kind of the strategies for, and if you are making comments, and you refer to a document, you read an article, the shifting gears. Make sure, one, that you cite to the evidence that you're relying upon. If you've pulled something off the internet, a study off the internet, cite to it. Don't just say I read something on the internet, but not only cite to it, put the link, if it's on the internet, put the link in a footnote. And even better, either print a copy of it or attach a copy of it to your comments, or if you have a lot of references, send them in a flash drive to Caltrans. Submit your comments electronically, or with electronically you can probably just include them all electronically, but include those comments. The reason is those become part of the administrative record, just as Caltrans's comments or the statements in the EIR have to be supported by substantial evidence. That means they can't just make a statement that says this will reduce VMT. They have to have some evidence, some studies, some analysis by experts and such that supports that determination. Your comments have to have that too. If you simply say this is going to induce demand, that's a statement that's not supported by anything. But if you say this is going to induce demand, and here's why, and here are the studies from UC Davis and elsewhere, you need to cite to those. And even though maybe other people are submitting those comments, those studies as well, or attaching those or putting links to them, you should put those in your link too. Because your statements, even if you're an expert, your statements have to be supported by substantial evidence to be substantive, and to be and for Caltrans to take seriously, and if somebody ends up litigating this, to help the attorney litigate this and make sure that the record is complete before Caltrans. So I'll leave it at that. I probably ran over my time. But.
Okay, so we've heard a few different perspectives, I think, and you've heard an overview. So let me just start out by saying that I've come to understand that actually of the traffic, a very small percentage of it is actually Davis residents. But I mean, so this is a big deal, but it affects a lot of people, from the Bay Area, Sacramento, and other places. So let me just start out with a little question. How many of you actually take I-80 into Sacramento at least once a week? Oh my gosh, okay. Maybe that's why you're all here. Well, we're going to end up with a question of, which of these alternatives do you like the best? But, all right, so one set of questions is about how this money that would be collected from tolls, and this is going to be for autumn, I think. So this money that's going to be collected, how is it actually going to be used? How could it or might it be actually used? Because as we heard, it could be a substantial amount of money.
Is this on?
Here,
Check, check.
here's a chair up here.
Oh, there's another chair. So the first step is establishment of a tolling authority, and then seeking tolling authority from the California Transportation Commission. We are currently in the process of developing that application now, and we have to make certain assumptions as part of that application process about things like hours of operation, how much the tolls would be, how much revenue would be generated, et cetera. But these are all sort of estimates, basically to prove that the project would have some benefit and would be financially viable. But then if the CTC grants that tolling authority approval, the tolling authority would then go through a process of developing what's called a concept of operations, and a whole host of policies, all over a multi-year process with public input to determine would electric vehicles be free? Would there be a low-income discount program for, low-income tolls for drivers who qualify, et cetera? And so that is a multi-year process that would have to take place before the lanes open. In the EIR, it does establish a VMT mitigation plan, which uses some of the upfront capital funding to pay for certain VMT reductions as mitigation under CEQA. And then with an assumption that some of those, with the assumption that some of those programs would continue to be funded using toll revenue. And because those would be under CEQA, would be required mitigation programs, at least for the period of mitigation, those would be required. But then anything above and beyond those investments that would be discretionary, that tolling authority would have the ability to make those discretionary decisions about how the funds would be used. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Okay, another short question. All right, so another question is, how might this affect, the city, Davis residents? Okay, so there's pricing, basically there's pricing in transit, and carpooling. Those are basically the three options. So I guess one or two of you might talk about, again, Davis is a small part of it, but it's going to be replicated in a lot of other communities along I-80. What might actually change in Davis? And I don't know, maybe who wants to take a shot at that? Steve, you're good at this kind of thing. And you're the one that's saying, we're...
Okay, the current project, let's see. In the long run, I don't think it will, because I think the situation will be the same. We will have a congested freeway. We may have a bus lane that works better. We may have some ability to pay tolls, but I don't really have too much confidence that a managed lane is going to be a panacea. So I suspect that in the long run, we spend $465 million and we don't get much. In the short run, it may be easier to get to Sacramento. Hey, I will go on Friday evening just like everybody else now. But there will be some funds for transit, which is a wonderful improvement. But I don't think that will last very long. It will also not improve the local congestion that lots of Davis residents are concerned about, the Mace mess. The local roads around I-80, in fact, those may get worse because more people will be driving to get on the new wider freeway. And so that's the congestion a lot of people care about.
I was kind of thinking, okay, there's going to be a whole lot more buses that we could take, right? And so we wouldn't have to depend on our cars. That would be probably be the best thing for Davis, right? Maybe.
From my perspective, yes. When the EIR's analysis of the various different alternatives and their impacts on transit, the one that performs the worst is converting a general purpose lane to a carpool lane because of the congestion that the buses would sit in. And so the EIR estimates, now you can quibble with Caltrans analytical methods, and fair enough, I'm not going to defend them, but it actually finds that you would have reduced transit ridership if you convert a lane because of the congestion being even worse for the buses. And so what we do see is one of the very positive benefits of this, unlike a carpool lane, toll lanes turn carpool violators into toll payers. Because the reason that carpool lanes don't work is because you have so many people that are driving them that shouldn't be, and there's no enforcement. When you have a toll lane, you have enforcement built in, and then you're taking that revenue and investing it in transit. So you have the vehicle throughput that allows the buses to move at 45 miles an hour or greater, and you're able to vary the pricing on that lane so that as more people get in the lane, the price goes up so that the lane continues to move freely. And that's one of the really positive things about pricing. So I do think we'll see dramatic improvements in travel time and reliability for the buses, which we know from the research is the number one thing on why people choose not to take transit is because of the lack of reliability. So it's not to discount some of the downsides, but I think we would see some very positive upsides in that particular respect.
You know, there were a whole set of questions, and I'm not sure there's an answer for it, but I want to just articulate it. A lot of people concerned about the safety impacts and the problems during the construction period, which would last, I don't know, how long is that going to be? Like 5 years?
Caltrans estimate is 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
I know myself, I was leaving Sacramento at midnight one night. All the ramps were shut down. It took me an hour wandering around Sacramento to figure out how to get back to Davis. So it's not a safety issue, but there will be there are a lot of safety concerns about it. Another set of questions is about land use. And so, you know, the reality is if we're going to support transit or get people even to carpool, for instance, you've got to have more density of land use to make it work, or I think. And so, you know, part of it is, you know, so some of the questions were Davis as a community, as well as all the other communities, is it going to be willing to really focus on land use, which means more density so that it'll be easier to operate a transit service, for instance, or even an access to the train, the Capitol Corridor. So anyone want to, I guess, Susan, that's kind of your bailiwick, right?
Yeah. Well, yes, we do need density to make transit work, and we are slowly but surely increasing density in certain parts of our metropolitan regions, which has been helpful to transit. But the point I want to make is that our transportation problem is fundamentally a housing problem. So that increase in travel between Sacramento and the Bay Area is about affordable housing. So, you know, when we understand the problem that way, then maybe we need to be thinking about different kinds of solutions. And of course, that's all, you know, our ability to take that $86 million for the lane. You know, legally, there's no way to take that money and invest it in housing. But, you know, pie in the sky, ivory tower thinking, that's really what we need to be doing is fixing that affordable housing problem rather than investing millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in widening freeways to make it easier for people to commute long distances because they can't afford to live near where they work.
Okay, this is for Naila, and it's this equity question. So Autumn made some comments about it, but if we do this pricing, lots of money is generated, lots of money, people pay a lot of money, and some of those people are, you know, can barely afford the car and driving, yet they need to get to work. But a lot of money is generated, and, you know, there's been these vague, you know, discussions about use it for transit or use it for offsetting costs. Can you drill down a little bit on that? You know, because you were emphasizing equity.
So, I mean, the lowest hanging fruit here would be something like free student passes, that it would be able to fund passes for free student passes, veterans, folks living in disadvantaged communities, folks in low-income housing would be able to have free transit passes. Not only that, there are also mechanisms potentially to be able to charge, like Autumn said, a lower pricing fee so that even when they're on the road, folks are not going to be charged as much. There's ways to use that money to do some, to increase density, potentially invest into the community so that folks in those communities don't have to drive as far. We can incentivize development in low-income communities, communities of color. Just a ton of, I think, the opportunities that we can use with tolling and with pricing lanes can be used to build the communities that we want to live in, that we want folks to have, while disincentivizing driving and car culture. So low-hanging fruit. I'll come up with some more as we think, sorry.
Okay. Is it okay if we go a little longer? Because officially we were going to end at 8:30. All right.
My babysitter has to leave at 9 o'clock. Just saying.
You're in good.
If we don't answer your question tonight, we're trying to bundle them so we can cover as many things. We're going to summarize them and send them to our panelists and see if we can get responses back. So.
Okay, some of us are having fun, so let's do a couple more. All right, so another set of questions is, why not put the money into the Capitol Corridor and improve the bike lanes and let people use their e-bikes? So
I mean, again, not to be the Debbie Downer on this, but we can't use this money for those things. I mean, this particular pot of money. Now, is there other money out there? Absolutely. And so I think the best second place is, can we use some of these toll revenues for some of those things? I mean, I have to say, I think this is also, we have to remember that we've seen historic investments in transportation from the Biden administration. There's a lot of funding that is available right now. The Newsom administration, as part of the budget deal this year, provided some additional funding for transit to help us out through the next 5 years, which is going to be critical. So it's not a time to think small. It's a time to think about what other possibilities do exist, and we love and welcome those ideas and want to hear them, because now is a really good time to go after additional funding for those kinds of projects. But this money, we can only use it for this.
okay, here's a question that I get often, but I'm going to deflect it to someone else, is, hey, if we do all these electric vehicles, what do we care about VMT? I know, Susan would like to. How about Susan and Steve, I think, are good candidates for this one. Yeah. Here.
Well, electric vehicles are still cars. There are embodied greenhouse gas emissions in the vehicles themselves, the batteries, all of that. They still use the roadways, and in fact, they're heavier on average for the same size vehicle than regular vehicles. So wear and tear on the pavement. Pavement has greenhouse gas implications, as our UC Davis Pavement Research Center tells us. So, yeah, and then all the other kinds of impacts of driving besides just greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not just that the internal combustion engine is a problem. Cars are problematic in many, many, many ways. Expensive, for one thing, which gets back to equity sorts of issues. Things to add, Steve?
Oh, just then we wind up with even more of what we have now, this automobile-centric landscape, which separates from people from one another and undermines community and lets us all spend our time in these metal vehicles that I don't think is really where we want to be.
So when I made comments earlier talking about pricing as an inevitability, part of this is we're having this conversation about this managed lane as a behavior change mechanism. But as we have more electric vehicles on the road, we're not going to be generating enough revenue for gas tax, right? And we still have to find a way to fund maintenance of our roads. So it is back to being like, it doesn't necessarily matter what type of vehicle you're driving on the roads. If we have to maintain it, there has to be a way to pay for that. And so that's also, electric vehicles don't really matter much in the equation because we got to pay for they need money somehow. So.
All right. Okay, so here's a whole nother area, and I think this is probably for Autumn, is if these, for all these options we're talking about, we didn't hear anything about trucks and, you know, freight trucks moving goods. How are they affected by all this?
Well, I am not the freight expert, and I'm mindful of being surrounded by professors, so I want to be careful. But yes, I mean, this is a very important goods movement corridor, right, as we know. And so the issue of congestion is a real issue for trucks. And, you know, idling trucks create diesel particulate air pollution that is very unhealthy for our communities. And so, you know, I know in a number of places, like in Southern California, they're looking at electric truck lanes and other kind of innovative ideas to try to get the goods movement without the emissions. But I wouldn't say we're doing anything anywhere near that innovative with this project.
Okay, I have a few questions for you all to kind of close this up. And that is, which of these alternatives might you prefer? So the way I'm going to ask them is, there's basically a set of options where there's pricing where everyone pays a fee, and I guess people are talking about $6 to $10, I think, is kind of the fee that's being discussed about Davis to Sacramento, right?
No, we're not speculating about fees at this point. Sorry.
Well, they could be time of day, so I'm just guessing from what I know. At peak time, it could be something like that. Off peak, it would be less. Okay, so we have the pricing. Then we have pricing where people that are in carpools go free, but if you're in a single occupant vehicle, you pay. And then another set of options, which is basically build just a bus lane. So let me start out. Okay, how many of you of those options would prefer making the extra lane being dedicated to buses and transit? Okay, it looks like. So the other options are the. Well, that's going to be the question. I think, you know, of course, that's in my mind as well, is because you think about Davis. You know, how many buses are we really going to get? At what level of service are they going to be able to operate? I mean, realistically, to do
I could tell you what we have right now, which is about 6 to 8 per hour each direction at peak periods.
Okay, and it would be at least double or triple that.
Well, I'm saying if we have new revenue, yes, but if we're just looking at a bus-only lane with our existing transit, we're talking about 6 to 8 vehicles per hour.
Oh, okay. So it could be actually occupied fairly well, because if you have all the other communities that have buses. So, okay, so I would raise your hands again. I think it was about a third. It looked like, yeah. What's that? Bus only. Bus only. And the other lanes stay the way they are. Okay, so that was it looked like about a third. What about if we price them all? So let's say it's roughly $2 to $10 for all the lanes, with no carpools, no freebies. How many would support that?
Why no freebies?
Because that's the next question. Okay, that looks like about 10%, but some key important people here. How about if it's all priced, but if you're a carpool of 3 or more, so I'll give you options. It can be 2 or more or 3 or more, go free. So let's start out with the two or more. How many would support that? Pricing, but all carpools with 2 or more go free.
You're talking all lanes or one?
Yeah, well, no, it would be, yeah, you can't. The traffic engineers would go crazy. One lane. How many would say that? Okay, just a few. What about if it's HOV, what we call HOV3, so carpools with 3 people or more? Okay, you get another 10 or 15% going there. And I get those are the main ones. Send the money back. Send the money back. Okay, that's a good 1/4 of you. All right, so Caltrans, you just heard the vote here. Listening in on the video there. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks to our great panel.
And I just want to acknowledge our planning team, Steve Wheeler, Judy Corbett, Alan Hirsch, and Anthony Palmer, who was not here tonight. We also had a number of our elected officials and former elected officials in the room, and I just really appreciate all of you being here tonight, and representatives of some of our elected officials who were not able to be with us. So I don't know if you want to put your hands in the air. Bob, who's here tonight, and Joe Provoza, our former mayor, Brett Lee, he was back there. Oh, there's Brett, and a representative of Cecilia Aguilar in the back. So thank you for being here tonight. And we will be posting the YouTube video for and sending you copies of that link when it is up. And we will forward all your questions to the panelists. Thank you very much.